Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the House Education Committee to order. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss school safety and security, both physical and other ways that we can address ensuring that our students, our teachers, our professionals in the building are learning in a safe environment. We'll be hearing from stakeholders and experts from around the Commonwealth. I'm going to ask the members to hold any questions until all participants of a particular panel have had an opportunity to present. For members of the general public, a copy of today's testimony can be viewed by scanning the QR code. We have a couple of them floating around, but if anybody needs access to it, a member of our team can certainly point it out to you. In the interest of time for our presenters, we have your testimony. I want to thank the presenters. This was a remarkable turnaround. This is obviously something that folks have been wanting to discuss in an open forum for quite some time, and testifiers did a remarkable job of getting their testimony to us quickly. I don't need you to read it to us. None of us do. We want to have a conversation so that we can dive deeper into those issues a little bit more specifically and kind of expound on. So please give us a summation of your testimony, and members will ask away. Couple things. Last sort of housekeeping issue. Today's meeting is being live streamed. I would ask folks to silence their electronics. We have a number of members who are joining us virtually. They will pop on and off. I'm going to just name the ones that I know are online right now. We have Representative Jim Prokopiak, Representative Tara Probst, Representative Malou McKenzie, Representative Paul Friel. I know Representative Jill Cooper is one that has indicated that she'll be popping on online. I'm going to hold my remarks for, I'm going to reserve the right to come back to this. I'm just going to ask that members that are here can introduce themselves, starting with Representative Isaacson.
Good morning. I'm Representative Mary Isaacson, 175th District out of Philadelphia County.
Good morning, Joe Cerisi, 146th District out of Montgomery County.
Good morning, Rep. Regina Young, Philadelphia and Delaware counties.
Thank you very much. Chair Topper, do you have any opening comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the testifiers and the information that you've gotten to us, and I know that I've met with some of you as well individually, and appreciate the work you're doing. I'd just like to start off by commenting, in Pennsylvania, sometimes we're the last to do something, or we hear something that all these other states have done. It is one thing that I think both Chairman Schweier and I are proud of, the work that has been done in this Commonwealth over the past 5-6 years, I think, to really improve our school security, look for ways that we can ensure that there are not just mechanisms in place if something would go wrong in a school, but trying to be preventative with that, both looking at not just the physical facilities, but also issues that plague our students outside of school as well, and our communities outside our school as well. So it has been something that I believe has been worked on in a very bipartisan manner over the past few years, and I believe that will continue. But I just want to say that certainly proud of the work that we're doing, and look forward to hearing how we can continue to do that work on behalf of our students, faculty, and families in our school districts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Quickly, I'd like to introduce three guests. First, my Chief of Staff, Nancy Wilt, is driven up from Allentown. Nancy had served as Board President of the Allentown School Board. Her successor is with us today. Andreen Brown is with us as well, and Anna Tiburcio, who is our School District Vice President. So I want to thank them for making the trip up. And I want to thank both Andreen and Anna for something very personal. My kids are students in the Allentown School District. Shortly after the shooting in Georgia, the horrific school shooting in Georgia, like a lot of school districts in the greater Lehigh Valley area, we were hit with a number of thank the Lord, false claims of guns in schools. My daughter's middle school, South Mountain Middle School, was one of them. She was texting me pictures of her in lockdown behind desks, hiding in a corner of a school. This was just a few weeks ago. We're very lucky in a school district like Allentown. We have metal detectors in our high school, and if all goes well, metal detectors in our middle schools. We have school resource officers that are highly skilled and highly trained in our high schools and middle schools. We have a police department of 220 sworn officers in the city of Allentown that has an updated MOU with our school district on how to address these things. We have teachers that are well prepared, principals that are well prepared for these terrible incidences. We have school counselors and school psychologists in many of our buildings. Not enough, but more than we're fortunate enough than more than other school districts. And we have family members that take this stuff seriously. The number of safe to stay reports that we got from that were quite a few. And I like to say that because, to Chair Topper's point, the system held in Allentown. It worked the way it was supposed to. As soon as reports were coming out, we had students in the safest possible circumstances that they could be in, given the information that we had. We had officers investigating, and within a matter of a few hours, I'm going to say something that I'm actually going to disagree with. Life went back to normal, but my kids were still traumatized. Like, we know that what we're doing to our kids is putting them in the best position possible, yet the circumstances that we're under are still extraordinarily traumatic. And the conversation that I had to have with Aaron shortly thereafter, and I know parents throughout South Mountain and throughout the district had to have, were difficult. Happened in the East Bend School District the same day, the Northwestern Lehigh School District in Lehigh County the same day. We're not immune to it. But the point of this hearing is not to talk about gun control. The point of this hearing is not to talk about criminal justice reform. This is the Education Committee, not the Judiciary Committee, not another forum. And so our job and our role, to Chair Topper's point, is to make sure in the little bit of the world that we have policy influence over, that we're able to put our kids in the best position possible. And I trust that all of the members, both Democrat and Republican, feel the exact same way. And I hope the public understands that this is an issue of significant bipartisan concern, and we're looking to hear from experts today to try to build upon what we have already done, so that more school districts like Allentown have those systems in place to ensure the safety of our kids. And so I genuinely appreciate our members for coming into this, as they have throughout this entire legislative session, with the most serious intentions and with the best intentions. With that, we're going to call our first panel, and I'd like to offer Miss Bailey, who is joining us online. Amy Bailey is the State Policy Director for Sandy Hook Promise. She is our lone testifier in our first panel. And with that, ma'am, if you would be so kind as to surmise your testimony, and we will open it up for questions from members. Thank you, ma'am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So good morning, Chairman Schweier and Chairman Topper and fellow committee members. My name is Amy Bradley, and today I join you in my capacity as the Director of Policy at Sandy Hook Promise. The issues of suicide, suicidal ideation, self-harm, acts of violence toward others, and social isolation can be very real among K through 12 students. These feelings are not confined to students in other states. It's also a significant concern in Pennsylvania. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, in Pennsylvania, suicide is the third leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 24. And according to stopbullying.gov, Pennsylvania is ranked 6th nationwide when it comes to students being bullied. Thankfully, schools in Pennsylvania have started seeking out solutions. However, the natural shift toward finding tools to better support students has resulted in unintended disparities. That is, for a variety of reasons, not all Pennsylvania students have equal access to high-quality, evidence-based violence prevention training. This unintentional disparity underscores the necessity for a statewide strategy that ensures all students have an opportunity to develop skills that they can use to help connect someone else or themselves to help when it's needed most. Such an approach is essential and aligns seamlessly with the objectives of the Safety and Violence for Education Act, also known as the Save Students Act. Section 1 emphasizes the crucial role of suicide prevention that centers the needs and interests of students. Section 2 centers general violence prevention training for students by teaching students to recognize the observable warning signs of someone who is at risk of harming themselves or others. Next, the legislation considers the impact of social isolation. Section 3 is designed to provide students with training that will help them recognize social isolation and equip them with strategies to reach out and connect with their peers. Imagine a school where no one feels invisible, where every student matters, where students feel connected and committed to one another's general well-being, and where friendships flourish instead of falter. To ensure that these initiatives resonate and thrive, the Save Student Act also includes student-led violence prevention clubs. These clubs could be existing clubs that raise their hand to be the keeper and sharer of knowledge. These upstanders will carry the message of prevention and inclusion into every corner of their schools. In closing, I ask you once again to imagine a school where every student feels safe and supported, where every student feels welcomed and connected, where every student can identify a trusted adult. Think of a future where every student has the tools and resources they need to recognize the observable warning signs, not just in themselves, but also in their friends, and in which every student understands the vital importance of telling their trusted adult what they know. Fortunately, Pennsylvania has a way to make this imaginary scenario real. It is called the Save Students Act, HB 2086, and I respectfully ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Open it up to questions and comments from my colleagues. Representative Cerisi. Oh, and I'd like to mention that Representative Nelson has joined us virtually. Rep. Cerisi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. You know, it's difficult to have you on when we think about Sandy Hook and the horrific action that took place there. As we look at suicide prevention and you look back on what happened in Sandy Hook, what do we need to look at as warning signs of what's being missed with our students? Now, that student wasn't in your building, right? It came from another building, if I'm not mistaken. He was older than the child that was there, was he? I don't remember. Huh? Yeah. I mean, district-wide, what were the warning signs that maybe should have been seen that we don't look at, and the prevention that you've now put in place in Sandy Hook that we need to look at beyond just the suicide watch stuff?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the trainings at Sandy Hook Promise are evidence-based and they're according to the grade level. So we have violence prevention and suicide prevention training in grades 6 through 12 and social isolation training in grades K through 12. So each of those trainings are grade specific and they build upon themselves as the children move up in grades. So it really depends on what grade you're in, but our trainings, Sandy Hook Promise specifically, most of the trainings are written by educators, and so they are gearing these trainings towards students. So they're able to tell them in kindergarten what signs to look for, in 6th grade what signs to look for. And it's not just, it's chronic isolation. It's your friend, you notice something that's happening in your friend and you're wondering what's happening. These trainings help really get to the bottom of what actions, what signs should you be looking for. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Rep. Young.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I will say I'm listening. As a legislator, I do like it when we have such hearings, when people are actually coming with some level of approach and solution based. We know the needs, we know why we're here, we know why we don't want to ever be here. However, when we have testifiers who are trying to offer some solution, especially evidence-based solution, I am most grateful, especially as it relates to this particular subject matter. As a mom who has children in the schools, it's really difficult to legislate knowing that I am a parent first, and so safety is paramount. I will like to also add the other piece that I love about your approach to this is that you're activating the children. And I think oftentimes we tend to work in these spaces in silos and we work with specific groups and we don't include all the groups, but the children are definitely a necessary voice if we want this to be effective. And so I appreciate this piece. The only other part, and I'm not sure we would add this part to, but including the teachers, right? Because they too are in a traumatizing situation. And so if we can have an inclusive approach where there's all hands on deck, all eyes, trying to be aware of what the issues are and identifying them in a preventable way, I think it could be absolutely most effective. So again, thank you for your testimony and the work you're doing in this space.
Oh, thank you so much. And the teachers are included. So the teachers will also be getting that yearly 1-hour training.
Thank you, ma'am. Rep. Isaacson?
Thank you. And I appreciate your testimony. And as a mother whose children have come of age since Sandy Hook, they were in young school. And one thing that I have observed, not on this committee, but also as a parent, is that we have a generation that's traumatized. They've never known anything other than that you have to have these drills and why. And so when we're talking about not just engaging them, but understanding where they're coming from, is there curriculum out there to utilize or make sure the Department of Ed or continuing education for teachers and counselors understanding where the everyday trauma that the students live with and have to process, which wasn't necessarily something that we had to do when we were younger. It's just the way society has evolved, and I didn't know if there was any curriculum or teachings out there to help guide people.
That is a really good question. So we do have resources on our website. But in addition, this piece of legislation will help make sure that those trainings are in every single school in Pennsylvania. So these resources would be available to the students and the teachers. And just because it's evidence-based, or if the school decides to choose evidence-based, these trainings are free. And so it's really, really important to make sure that every single school in Pennsylvania has access to these resources. But we also do have them on our website. But once again, it's, just making sure that every student has access to the same type of tools to help them with violence prevention, suicide prevention, and social isolation.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Chair Topper?
Thank you. Ms. Bradley, is there a component of your training that involves, particularly for the educators and administrators, social media training? So for the reason I ask is, obviously our kids don't necessarily need social media training. They know how to deal, when I say deal with it, use it. I don't, I mean, my boys could run circles around me. I would have no idea how to keep track of what's going on. I mean, I can pretend like I do, and I can threaten that I do, but in reality, I don't. Can't keep up with it. They name social media apps that I don't even know that existed. But that is part of our generation, and many of our generation are the ones in the classrooms. And I assume that as we look at the trauma surrounding and the mental health issues surrounding many of our kids, a lot of it can be amplified via social media. So is that a component of the training that you offer to school districts, particularly for educators and administrators?
That's a good question, and that would be age appropriate, right? So it would definitely depend on which grade the children were or the students were in. And it also really depends because this piece of legislation isn't specifically it's not written as Sandy Hook Promise would be the provider of these trainings. The schools get to actually choose, or the districts get to choose which types, who provides the training. Sandy Hook Promise is one of them, but there would be a list of trainings available. So it would really depend on who the district chose for those trainings.
Understood, but just specifically to some of the trainings that you have offered, has a training for the adults that you would be working with, educators and administrators, has there been any component of, look, this is how you monitor social media, this is what kids are using, particularly at the high school or middle school levels, this is what you need to be aware of. Is there any component of that training in what you guys offer?
That's a really good question. I would have to look into that specifically for the teachers, but I can look at that and get right back to you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I want to kind of go back, if I could, Ms. Bradley, on the kind of a striking statistic that you cited, is that Pennsylvania is ranked 6th in incidences of bullying, or at least reported incidences of bullying in the nation. I know this seems like an obvious question, but from any of your research, I think the answer is very clearly going to be yes, but from your research that you have had in Pennsylvania or other states, the incidences of bullying, there's a direct correlation, correct, between that and suicide attempts, that and school violence, whether it's something as, a low-level school violence to the most tragic and most extreme school violence. Can you talk a little bit about those correlations?
I mean, yeah, 100%. Yes. I mean, bullying does lead to acts of violence for oneself or another. And I do agree with Chairman Topper that social media can really contribute to that. So it's our intention to really get in there to make sure that these students are aware of what those signs actually are. It's, kids just can't go home and shut everything off. It's surrounding them daily, hourly, minute by minute. So these type of trainings are extremely important for children to have the tools to help identify these warning signs, to help see if a kid's being bullied, what those signs could be, how they can either step in or step up. So it's extremely important because they are very closely related, and we can do something about it. So, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. And I don't need anything today, but if Sandy Hook Promise or any other of your national or partners have model legislation addressing bullying, we'd be certainly happy to see that as yet another avenue that we might be able to take a look at and see how it would fit into what we already do in Pennsylvania and what we could be doing better. So I would certainly welcome any input or any ideas that you may have upon that.
Great. Thank you.
So thank you, ma'am. Seeing nothing further, I'll ask my colleagues now. Okay, seeing nothing further, I genuinely appreciate your testimony. I appreciate your advocacy and the specific legislative work, as Rep. Young said, coming with ideas on how to make things better is super helpful to us as we continue to try to move policies forward. Your incredible advocacy in turning the most horrific tragedy that I can imagine as a parent or as a community, and certainly the most horrific thing that I've ever witnessed as an adult, into action is remarkable. And so a credit to you and your organization, and we appreciate all that you do. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
With that, we're going to invite panel 2 up, and we have Mr. Kevin, is it Mengel or Mengel? Mengel, I'm sorry. He's a SRO, School Resource Officer at Spring Grove School District. Todd Repsher, who's the District Security Officer at the Bethlehem Area School District. And Dr. Jason, I'm going to try Bottiglieri. Did I get that right? I'm just kidding. Thank you, sir. Who is the superintendent of the Northeastern School District, and you're here on behalf of PARS, the Pennsylvania Rural and Small Schools. I think it was important for us, just so folks know, to have a broad perspective across the Commonwealth. As my colleague and friend Chair Topper has wanted to say, we live in an extraordinarily diverse state where areas of Pennsylvania certainly don't look like each other, and we wanted to hear from rural school districts, suburban school districts, and urban districts today, and all three of you gentlemen represent those. Same things apply. I'm going to ask you guys to surmise your testimony so that we can have an open dialogue and go from there. So, gentlemen, Mr. Mengel, thank you. Or as officer, I'm sorry, I should say. If you'd like to kick us off, thank you, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Schweier, Chair Topper, and fellow committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to present testimony on a matter of critical importance and frankly something I'm very passionate about. That is the role of school resource officers in ensuring safety and well-being of our students, teachers, and staff. My name is Kevin Mengel, and I serve as the school resource officer for Spring Grove School District in York County, Pennsylvania. I have, as both a law enforcement officer and a mentor, my role allows me to provide immediate protection while also building relationships with students that foster trust and open communication. My department for the last 2 decades has been involved in schools and school safety initiatives. We are involved in the Spring Grove Area School District, the Dover Area School District, and the Lincoln Intermediate Unit with the York Learning Center. As an SRO, I am proud to be a part of this program involved to address the complex school threats that schools face today, from a physical security concern to the mental and emotional well-being of our students. We play a unique and indispensable role in our school. We are not only a first line of defense in emergencies, but also we are there to mentor, educate, and we become a trusted member of their school community. In conclusion to my long testimony that you guys have in front of you, in a world where school safety challenges continue to evolve, SROs are a proven, adaptable, and effective solution. As we continue to invest in the future of our education system, we must prioritize the safety of the students and the staff by ensuring that every school has access to the protection and resources that they need. I strongly urge this legislature to support expanding funding for SRO programs and ensuring that no Pennsylvania school is left unprotected. I appreciate your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions then. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rupture?
Good morning. I too would like to thank you all for this opportunity. My name is Todd Repsher. I'm the coordinator of school safety and emergency management with the Bethlehem Area School District. We are comprised of 22 schools and roughly 13,000 students. 22 schools and 13,000 students. My job as the coordinator of school safety is to work in cooperation with our superintendent, our chief of pupil services, our director of student services, to make sure that we are holding up not only aspects of physical security, but in my opinion, the much more important aspect, behavioral health, culture, and climate, right? Physical security, that's pretty much easy. You want to be working in both areas very proactively. You can make sure you have all the best locks and the window exits and the lockdown shades and the vape detectors and metal detectors and all of those hard target aspects for a school, including landscape. But in my opinion, working from the inside out, the behavioral health, climate, and culture, not only with the students, but with the staff, providing them the requisite training. Now, Act 55 took a very big leap a couple of years ago with changing the amount of school safety training that schools actually staff members reach, from 1 hour of training every 5 years to 3 hours every year, one of which has to be in person. Those are great strides with working with our staff. We also train our staff on some things like therapeutic behavior management, restorative practices, Leader in Me, all of these culture things that we can work towards our students and recognizing issues when they come to our attention. Obviously, there are the programs in place, the Safe to Says, the Handle with Cares, which quite effectively, we did about 1,313 Safe to Says since it was implemented in January of 2019. The most of those that we deal with behavioral health issues, suicidal ideations, cutting. And also we deal with a lot of our Handle with Cares. And our Handle with Cares is a great program where we partner with our local law enforcement, where a student may experience something traumatic outside of school, and we get a notification through the Safe to Say platform. And it basically just says Handle with Care. So those are sent out to all of our staff and teachers and counselors so they can keep that kid on their radar. They know something traumatic has happened to that kid. So that's, being proactive, right? Being proactive 100%. And if we continue to be proactive, whether it be through our trauma-informed practices, our SAP and our MTSS programs, we too deal with, at our secondary levels, the Sandy Hook Promise and the Save Promise Clubs with our secondary schools. All of these programs in place in order to make kids feel like they're part of the school. Let them be a part of that community so we don't have to deal with all the trauma that was caused. Partly, like you said earlier, with the school shootings right? In my district too, we dealt with all of these safe to says right after the fact. But if we work together and work on their community and their culture, and we build them stronger internally, I think the threats of school violence and the threats of suicidal ideations will diminish greatly. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Battalieri, is that close? Did I get it
Yeah.
right?
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you to Representative Schweier and members of the House Education Committee for allowing me the time to share realities of safety that exists in school communities across our Commonwealth. My name is Dr. Jason Baudelaire, and I've served as a school superintendent for about a decade, currently at the Northeastern New York School District. As a public school leader, having held numerous leadership positions for more than 25 years, comprising 5 different school systems across 3 different Pennsylvania counties, my testimony today is not only from firsthand experience, but from also my engagement with school leaders across the Commonwealth. I'm here advocating for students who are eager to learn, eager to engage, and eager to explore in an environment absent from threats of harm, violence, and emotional distress. The safety of our students is the foundation for which all learning depends. In recent years, we've witnessed too many devastating incidents where that sense of safety has been questioned. Today, our schools are installing double locked doors, securing entrances, conducting immediate background checks on visitors, using metal detectors, incorporating walkie-talkie communication, monitoring surveillance cameras, and conducting lockdown drills and reunification protocols, all of which has become our new normal. Schools now face growing challenges such as student vaping, mental health crises, rising incidents of suicide ideation, and numerous other mental health circumstances that surpass the belief of many. While PARS member schools greatly appreciate the funding that has already been received, it's clear that continuous investment must be a priority. In many rural remote regions, schools are served by small police departments or by the state police. Both receive my personal gratitude for the service they provide. However, these regions of the state are often unfavorable locations for experienced officers and troopers. Additionally, the Safe to Say program, while well-intentioned, is contributing to administrative fatigue. The influx of anonymous tips, many of which are speculative, requires extensive investigation by both police and school leaders. The concern about extreme violent behavior among students, which has recently seen an emergence as early as kindergarten, is particularly alarming. A prioritization of ensuring that all schools, including early learning programs, are equipped with mental health professionals empowered to address these behaviors before they escalate has become a necessity. Despite our substantial efforts, the incidents are increasing where students demonstrate extreme behavior that communities are calling for increased legal accountability. School safety legislative mandates often add layers of complexity to our efforts. Act 44 of 2018 established a mandate for each school district to have a school safety and security coordinator. The law that is unfunded mandated this position to be a school administrator. For a majority of PARS member districts, this responsibility was added to the already full plate of the district superintendent. No funding was provided to support this additional responsibility in 2018, and still today, 6 years later, no funding. School leaders agree having an identified person responsible for school safety as the go-to person is important. However, PARS member districts don't have enough administrators to do all the work that is needed, and with no funding to support an added position, we become the de facto. 4 years after Act 44, the General Assembly approved Act 55. This law established new requirements for school safety and security training for all school employees and increased training to 3 hours each year, like you just heard. School leaders agree that safety training is essential. As our safety scenarios, threats, and mental health incidents rise and change. However, as the list of state-mandated training requirements increase between safety and other state requirements, districts don't have enough hours of professional development time to meet the requirements. Some districts are being forced to determine which mandated trainings receive a priority and which ones are bypassed. Act 18 established a requirement for all school entities to develop threat assessment teams. This process determines if a person's behavior poses a threat of violence to themselves or others. That's quite a significant requirement to expect school employees who must assume a high level of liability and responsibility after merely earning a credential by watching a few training videos. School leaders express frustration with the forced choices between the safety of our kids and the numerous other competing needs. We find ourselves in a financial tug of war between funding student protection, purchasing educational materials, or repairing a decades-old leaking roof. In the current financial support from state funds, while very much appreciated, falls drastically short of the actual need. We're now required not only as a state mandate, but also as a growing community expectation to do so much more than ever intended, but without the funding to do it. In recent years, both meritorious and competitive school safety and mental health grants have been offered to districts. In 22-23, $190 million was provided to school districts. This was split evenly between mental health and physical security. In 23-24, we saw a decrease in grant funds, only $90 million for school mental health and $18.6 million for security. And this year, funding was decreased again to $100 million for safety and mental health. The pattern of decreasing funding has been realized by my district, seeing a 45% decrease from just 2 years prior. The 3-year decline is raising significant concerns about the level of attention being given to the key issues of school safety and mental health. Additionally, the School Safety Competitive Grant provided $32 million in 23-24. HARS member school districts portray concerns of a disadvantage. Forcing schools to compete with each other and other organizations for critical safety and mental health funding is not just unfair, it's counterproductive. Safety and mental health should never be treated as luxuries. They are fundamental needs for every student in every community. When grant funding for these areas is competitive, it implies that these are optional or supplementary services rather than core elements of a successful education system. Drastic rise in mental health needs of adolescents pose the biggest challenge. This must be a shared responsibility. Funding for mental health personnel is desperately needed. Significant occurrences of mental health are at a high, causing classrooms to be emptied, hallways to be cleared, and buildings to be locked down. These situations are real and are occurring more frequently than is widely recognized. Schools are asking for an increased investment from the state to ensure that systems already in place are fully funded so we can stop getting the busy signal when we call for help. County crisis agencies are understaffed and cover large areas that prevent any type of expedited response, leaving our schools with limited options and no help during mental health situations. When we look at county support, children in these service agencies continue to face a high number of vacancies, offer inadequate pay, hindering recruitment efforts, and contributing to the declining career interest. School leaders share concerns about delayed response times or no response from Child Protective Services, limited communication with school officials, and a lack of collaboration. When county agencies don't respond, schools are left to fill that gap with insufficient resources. Schools continue to take on more, and soon that bubble will burst. This growing pace simply can't be maintained. We've seen evidence of this in recent years as mandates increase, safety incidents, and teacher expectations reaching troubling heights. The education system struggles with high-quality teacher recruitment, an exodus of teachers leaving the profession, and high school graduates less interested in pursuing education as a career choice. Additionally, our schools are confronted with numerous competing budget priorities. As operational costs surpass funding, school districts are forced to make unpopular and controversial choices. In many cases, leaders believe that student safety and mental health services should be safeguarded. We have a collective obligation to ensure that every student can attend school without fear. School leaders are calling to fully fund personnel so that the prioritization of safety is more than a catchphrase. Safeguard the physical and emotional well-being of students, as well as our dedicated professionals. The request is simple. Fully fund all the priorities and mandates that have already been established. Fully fund the physical security and mental health baseline standards developed by the PCCD, School Safety and Security Committee. If the standards are important enough to be identified as baseline priorities, then funding should not prevent schools from achieving those established expectations. Let's make a commitment to school safety and show the priority that we all talk about, not by setting more expectations, mandates, or required program development, but rather with simple funding that supports adding people. I'd like to thank this governing body and ask for full consideration of my written testimony, which expands on today's comments and includes several testimonials from school leaders across Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Chair Topper, if you'd like to kick us off, and then I have Rep. Isaacson after him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Mango, and Mr. Repsher as well, who are involved in specific school security. I think when the idea of SROs were first brought up, there was concern. You know, what would this look like in a building? Almost like, you know, you have armed personnel in a building. Would it feel like a prison guard? Would they feel like a cop on the beat? I can only speak to the districts that I represent, specifically the one that both my boys attend in Bedford Area School District. Officer Joe has become an invaluable part of the staff. Retired PSP, Joe Koval, one of the, fine officer in his day, but what he's done at that school has been transformational. It's not just about providing security for the school. He has become a confidant for kids. He has become a confidant for educators, for administrative. He goes through the building. He helps, whether it's, at the end when it's, when bus and parent pickup, and he's all over the place. I don't know how he does it. He's at sporting events. He has truly that culture of behavior that you speak of. I've seen it happen. Can we talk a little bit about the role that plays in school security? Not just in the sense that there's somebody who, yes, is certainly trained in weaponry and could bring down if something, the unthinkable happens, but also just the day-to-day improvement in the buildings where there is, where there are resource officers. And maybe some of your experiences in that with kids who, go up to them and hug them every day. And this isn't, I guess there was a fear initially, this would be someone that kids might fear in some sense. I've not seen that. I've seen just the opposite.
I definitely keep an open door policy. My office is normally visited by kids that I can serve as that middle ground between a counselor or a principal. They come to me when they're having a crisis or they're having a breakdown, and I can help work with them in an environment that they feel safe and they feel protected, and they know that they can come down, and at any time they don't need to set a meeting with me, whereas a counselor, there may not be availability. My door is always open. They know where to find me. As you said, in the beginning of the school day, I'm out front. I'm a presence. I'm there. During lunches, if you need me, I'm standing right behind you. At sporting events, I attend all our sporting events. I'm there, and like you said, it's just that confidant that you become that friendly face. The uniform almost disappears, and that mentor role definitely takes a precedent over top of them looking at you as a security guard or a prison guard, for a lack of better terms. So it's a role you definitely have to encompass. I enjoy the mentoring side a lot more, and being that person the kids can count on for sure.
So I could speak to this from a couple of angles. My career prior to being in the schools for 27 and a half years, I worked in law enforcement. 19 of those, I was a SWAT cop. But towards the end of my career, I was a captain and finally retired as a deputy chief. So we were responsible for selecting the individuals in our department to become SROs. And not every policeman has the requisite skills to be an SRO. They do the training, the basic NASRO, the advanced NASRO, and all of that afterwards. But just like not every officer is going to be a SWAT cop or a traffic officer, some have a certain proclivity to fit into that role. And what I see within our SROs and in our buildings, not only are they an advocate for the kids and a mentor to the kids and also providing that area of safety, but they do the same for the staff. They become members of the school community. They are one of the school community. And when we had to replace a couple of SROs just through promotions, the schools that they were in were devastated. You thought we were taking away Christmas. You know, they were like, well, how are you going to replace them? It's like, listen, we've done this before. It's going to be okay. And those SROs that came in and they found their footing and they became members of the community. And they become members of trust because in our district, some of our kids come from rougher areas, right? So their view of law enforcement to begin with might be a bit skewed. So showing that positive angle and, hey, we're not somebody here to fear. I can help you. I'm here to help you. If you have problems, come to me. That provides a great profit over anything else. And it does work towards that community, and it does work towards that culture and advancing it in a proper direction. Because some things that maybe teachers and staff might not see, our law enforcement partners may tend to see that. Because they not only see these kids in school, but they have a chance to contact them outside of school and in their neighborhoods and in their, within their own areas. So they have much more contact. And now with our SROs, we have Junior Police Academy, which they run every summer for kids in our middle schools that apply, and they take them through a 2-week program and, just develop that camaraderie. So SROs are an invaluable aspect of school safety. And the one thing that is key to remember is if an SRO is not in the building, police still need to be called. Would you rather it be somebody such as this gentleman next to me who knows the community and knows the kids, or just an officer off the street taking that next call up? Not that that officer wouldn't do a good job, but this guy's already there. He already knows all the parties involved. And I think they perform an invaluable service.
As a parent, I can speak from that side of things. I think it's been remarkable what's happened in that district, and I continue to hear more stories about that, particularly in a time when, there are some areas where we are understaffed. We don't have, enough of whatever you name it. That particular school resource officer seems to be also fitting into that slot until we can continue to develop a little better pipeline for the rest of our staff. Mr. Bartolari, I want to talk a little bit. I mean, I'm going to push back a little bit on some of the unfunded mandates because it's hard, as I've seen this budget, including a 10% increase this year in terms of our combination of the mental health and school security, which we believe by combining those allowed more flexibility in those dollars. And so I guess what I'm going to say is this: while yes, there are certain mandates in terms of school safety and security, what we have tried to do, and I'm sure we will continue to look at ways that maybe we can do it better, is apply flexibility to the dollars that are out there so that you can use them for a variety of platforms. So even if something is, let's say a new induction of a school resource officer to a school, maybe we don't say specifically these dollars are to fund that. We're trying to make some of the dollars that are available there to be able to fund that, if that makes sense. Is that how it is viewed when we try and add flexibility to those dollars, or are we still just saying, well, look, if you put something new on it and you don't specifically say that's how it's going to be funded, we're going to view that as an unfunded mandate?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there are mixed reviews, right? The advocacy from PARS member schools has been conflicting with combining of those. It forces districts not only to make decisions, which we make decisions, a lot of them, every day, right? But it has the potential to have then communities push back on what those decisions are because there has been a combining, and forces communities questioning the district decisions about where they have. When they were separate, right, there was guaranteed investment in mental health, and there was guaranteed investment in school safety. And while we appreciate the flexibility, and the majority of folks would probably agree, there are schools that, because of their limited resources, had to make a very specific decision into one of those areas, forcing them to be accountable to then how to address the one that doesn't have specified funding. So it's a difficult balance.
And that's, local control goes both ways, right?
It does.
It's great to have the local control until everybody starts complaining, and then it's easy to blame somebody else. And trust me, we understand a little bit about that in what we do. As I see it, unless I am shown a reason that would compel me to look at it differently, I still believe that the flexibility in dollars will help long-term. Yes, it will mean maybe some more decisions, and again, we can look at that, but it would be interesting to see over the next few years how it plays out, particularly since we moved a lot of those grants out of the competitive space this year in the budget and said, you know, it's going to be equal in terms of distribution. I'd like to see how that plays out over the next couple of years, and maybe PARS can kind of keep track of their member schools and how that's going so that we can make those informed decisions.
The underlying concern, I think, of all districts is the concern that PCCD grant funding may not be guaranteed going forward.
Right, and look, we do a yearly budget, right? Any line item can disappear at any time. Here's what I'll say. I've done this now for almost 12 years. Worked on this committee, you know, most of my career, and in this role as chairman, minority chairman this session. There is zero indication to me that there will be less attention paid to school students' mental health and security. I see that, I don't see it in the conversation in any part of the Capitol. So yes, I understand grant funding can go away. But I also understand that the conversations surrounding this issue lead me to believe that it will continue to not only be there, but increase. So thank you.
That's
Thank you,
great
Mr.
to hear.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Representative Isaacson, then Representative Cerisi.
Thank you. And I appreciate very much everything that's been discussed in this panel. Certainly, as a member of the Basic Education Funding Commission this past year, along with both chairmen, we heard from rural, suburban, and urban school districts. And amazingly, the challenges, as you've all spoken about, are very similar, just different situations and settings. But a couple things that were said that was, you know, I think we're all touching upon, and this is a great first start discussion, having this hearing, is the new normal. Our last panelist and you all are speaking to, what is the new normal in our school districts? And it is not just going to school for your social studies, arithmetic, and learning how to read and write any longer. Schools are resource centers for families and students, and we, as the legislature, need to recognize that and fund that. I'm 100% on funding things, especially, you know, I have the largest school district, so I understand the challenges. But I will say, Doctor, one thing I don't think you're ever going to get out of this General Assembly is us legislating the staffing on the local school districts. They want their local control on that. And I think I had concerns, as you did, about the combination with regard to the safety and mental health. I think we should be increasing both and making sure they're dedicated. Sometimes, unfortunately, we would find giving somebody a choice is not always the best thing because you want to be able to do both. And I recognize that. And certainly the discussion for the need for continuous resources and the having dedicated personnel. That, like I said, we can't legislate that, but I think that that is something we should try and come up with a discussion about, making sure that the additional resources are there outside of the funding for just the educational purposes. So I don't know how, as a superintendent, or how you would help us direct the Department of Education to assist with that, with the school districts. You know, just any thought on that, because that's what really struck me is the need for additional resources and staffing with regard to this outside of your education funding for the requirements of educating our children.
So as superintendents across the state, right, an important piece is, you know, local advocacy with county agencies that are charged with, you know, running children and youth services, child protective services, crisis response to high levels of mental health. We're absolutely interested, and we continue to partner and build relationships with those agencies. they suffer similar situations, right? As I shared, relatively detailed in the written testimony, there's a perception they're underfunded, and trying to get high-quality crisis workers, mental health workers to actually respond to help school districts when those situations rise to perceived level 10, if you will, right? Those calls, quite honestly, aren't being answered. They don't have the resources, they don't have the ability to respond, and we're left to be able to deal with it, right? We don't, while I don't want to use the word luxury, I can't think of a better way to describe it. We, as school districts, don't have the luxury to be able to send that kid home in crisis. Somehow, the agencies that are identified as the ones that are supposed to be helping and supporting, they get the ability to say, we don't have enough people. We don't.
Well, I understand that, and I understand, I think you said it best, Mr. Mengel, with regard to having a public service calling. Could you speak to his response possibly about how you're able to be a dedicated employee in this situation and how possibly other school districts could come about that? And then I'm done, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, and specific to that the last request about the inavailability to children and youth, sometimes we as law enforcement can be that liaison. I can think of many times that we're staying, waiting until that person becomes available so we can step in and become that availability of where we're going to house this child until we can find a safe place or a safety plan. So having an SRO there or law enforcement ability to get there to become that safe haven until children and youth is available for the school is a possibility. And I've been used in that role several times as the liaison in waiting for children and youth to become available to help service that child for a safety plan.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Cerisi and then Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony. I think that the issues you bring up here are definitely issues that we hear all the time. I often refer back to my experiences as a school board member and the challenges that we faced in underfunding. And you saw this last year, as the representative brought up, that we did put more money, a record number of money in education, but we know we're far from where we should be. That being said, underfunded mandates, not enough cash does affect what you can do. And we took it on as our district to bring in a police force, called it the Springford Police. All officers who were either retired or changed positions, all trained through the training of the, what do you say it, MOPEC training. They all go through all the training, 7 vehicles, everything they needed to have. We took it on as a district, which some people felt may have not been popular at the time, for officers to be fully clothed and police officers with the bulletproof vests. 1 complaint out of 8,000 students. That's all we had. And the police force has grown, and I've also been part of speaking to another district that's not even in my district about starting a police force. So unfortunately, we can't teach like we did 50 years ago. As the old saying goes, this isn't your parents' educational system any longer. We have to look at things different, as my colleague referred to, and this is one of them. And where I'll disagree with the comment that was made on funding is we haven't done enough. Money doesn't fix the issues, but when you come into a building and say you have to fortify it to be a place where no one can get in, when you have to take door handles off, which I didn't understand that at first, why they were doing that, when you have to put shades in classrooms and locks on doors, when you have to put security systems in that could almost find a pin on the floor and it has to have a remote access place, when you have to look at ways to warn the whole building, there is not enough money to be able to do this. And we were also part of a training in the building for an active shooter. And let me tell you something, our teachers took 3 days off after they went through that training because no one understood what an active shooter really was in that time. They couldn't believe what they had to go through. So my comment's more of the money. we're not giving enough money to these school districts. We sit on a $14 billion surplus, as we all have heard in Pennsylvania. Now, one-time money cannot be used for reoccurring. So a grant that you get 3 years out of, what happens in the fourth year? We weren't taking grants at times as districts because we were going, what happens in the fourth year? We have to pay for it. But if we're able to give some of the infrastructure to buy the uniforms up front, to buy the guns, to buy the cars, to buy all of this service, how much does it come back and help you in your budget then to be able to pay some of these officers? I am not a fan of bringing in a non-police officer for security. I don't think it works. I don't think that's the way we should go. I think they have to be certified officers. I'm also not a fan of sharing an officer between the borough municipality and the school district. I think they need to be dedicated to the district specifically because we have many cities. I mean, like I said, my district has 8,000 students, 1,000 staff members. That's 9,000. That's bigger than some of our boroughs and almost bigger than some of our municipalities. So, you know, are there other things we can do to fund that you're not seeing us do? And are there other ways to look at this? And I do believe that the districts should have their own police force. And on that, I'd like to ask, you know, from the police officer's perspective, how the municipalities and the boroughs reacted, because we had pushback from some of our local police forces when we started this police force, that they felt like they didn't have authority over us, which they really didn't need to have authority. We were our own community. So you can speak to that too.
So in the perspective of them saying that you have created your own Springford Police Department instead of using the agency that is direct municipality over you or jurisdictionally, is that what you're asking? Just to clarify, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with creating a district-owned department. I know specifically for our SROs, we are just dedicated to our district. We may work for Northern York County Regional Police Department, but I am dedicated to Spring Grove Area High School, whereas that is my role, that is my job. So I don't think there's a difference between having delegated officers to that district or creating your own police force, because I think the purpose ends up being served the same way. We are not rotated on like a monthly basis like our patrol officers are. I've been in the same high school for the last 6 years. Been with the department for 11. So the last 6 years I've been dedicated to the community of Spring Grove. So I think having your own police force, it will serve the same purpose as the way that we are currently handling it. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sorry.
Who pays your salary?
My police department does.
And does the school district reimburse the police department?
Correct. They pay for the position.
Okay.
Rep. Young?
A couple of different things. I'm really excited about today's hearing, I have to admit. As a member of the School Safety and Security Committee, I will say that it is it's great to hear all that is happening. I love how Officer Mingo, I love how you broke down not only rural, urban, and suburban, but how you collectively identify what the problems generally are and how they should be addressed. I think oftentimes when we're talking about education, people have one-track mind. They think about what's going on in their district. And I represent 3 districts, Philadelphia, William Penn, and then also Interborough. And so they're vastly different. So this is very, very great. I also would like to add that out of all of your testimonies, I was listening for the pieces that connected everybody, and the word wasn't mentioned, but what I resonated with was relationships. You need relationships. In those school buildings, as a former educator myself, relationships matter. To your point, the more you build strong relationships and foundation, not only with the school community, but with the parents and then the outside community, the uniforms disappear because that's what happens. They just see the person. And so I think it's really good to keep on with that momentum, especially as we're trying to figure out the funding pieces of how that can effectively help all the communities that's representing the Commonwealth. And so I do think you guys are doing a great job. I do appreciate your approach, and I do want to make sure that we're hearing, whether you're a superintendent, school officer, whatever role you play in these schools, communities, absolutely every last one of them matter. And the more we work together, the better we can try to ease the concerns of these new normals as it relates to the chaos that are taking over our schools. So I appreciate you. I thank you for your work and your service. And Superintendent, as we are working to work on the funding piece to adequately fund all the pieces, because each and every one of those are very, very important. Let's work on nurturing those existing relationships in those communities with our school partners, because you'll be surprised how many community-based organizations can help with the initiatives of the schools to help offset some of these exterior problems as well. So relationships all around matters, because as we all know, schools are the anchor of community. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Gentlemen, first and foremost, thank you. I have a number of questions, or at least topics of conversation I'd like to brush on. Mr. Rupture, Bethlehem and Allentown are very similar districts. You have some of the suburban areas as a regional district versus us, but we have at least significant pockets of your district have demographics very similar to mine in Allentown. How successful do you feel you've been in putting officers in schools that are, there's two things, right? There's a personality of the cop and their training, but also we have questions making sure that our officers reflect the community in which they serve. Have you been successful in finding officers of color, people that speak Spanish, et cetera, for your South Bethlehem schools, similar to my schools in Allentown? Have you been able to identify those officers with your partnerships?
So the short answer is we have. Our last SRO at Brockwell Middle School, Officer Rodriguez, he was a Spanish-speaking officer, and he was in that school he was in that school before I came to the district when I was still with the Bethlehem Police Department.
So for some time.
Yeah, so he was in there. The challenge that you have with just getting the officer to look like a member of the community is that doesn't, just because you say it's a primarily Hispanic community, you still need to have those qualities as an SRO.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you don't want to just try to shoehorn that to check a box, all right? While I understand there is importance with that, I think it's more important to make sure that you have the right person in place for that job, whether they be black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. If they're that good, they'll form the relationships, as you were mentioning, that are required. But it has happened in the past where we have had Hispanic officers, African-American officers that have worked within our schools.
Sure, and I appreciate that, and that's what we've largely found in Allentown as well. But it's a question that we need to certainly explore as we look to not only be more inclusive, but also make sure that we're breaking down whatever barriers we can between police officers and the community at large. So I genuinely appreciate that. For you, sir, and for Mr. Mengel, Officer Mengel, one of the things that struck me from Rep. Cerisi's question was just how many different ways there are to do this across Pennsylvania, from retired state officers that are working in Chair Topper's district to formulation of school district employee police officers that I'm assuming are Act 120 certified, along with what we have in Allentown, and sounds like what you have in your parts of York County, sir. But to my knowledge, there's and I could be wrong, and please correct me if I am. There's no association of SROs or school districts or police departments that partner. How do you collaborate across the Commonwealth, and perhaps it's PARS or School Boards Association or PASA? Where are the areas of collaboration so that you're able to learn best practices from each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Where are those opportunities?
It sounds like PASRO.
Oh, and make sure you're please closer. I just made aware for the folks online, they need to be able to have the microphone closer. So thank you.
I know specifically for us in York County, we meet twice a year.
Who's we?
As the SROs of York County, we send out an email invitation, and we get together and we talk about current events, things you're seeing, how can we do things better. We're actually met there with the district attorney's office, where they come in and they provide what they're seeing. So we do that. We are also part of PASRO. the PA School Resource Officer Association. We get updates via email through them of what is being current event-wise and what they're seeing. As far as collaboration via the whole state of SROs, no, I do not. I'm not aware of anything. Whereas we all get together and there is a conference through PASRO. I have not attended it, but I do believe there is a conference.
Todd, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to go the same way. Most of our members are, in addition to being part of NASRO, are a part of PASRO. So they attend those conferences where you meet with other SROs throughout the state, and they bring in, like any other conference you might attend as an educator or whatnot, they bring in topic experts and you learn best practices, and you broach all of those different things, whether it be courses in SEPTED, physical site assessments, whatever. Because part of the SRO's job also is they do some instructing as well, right? Our SROs help out in some of our health classes, particularly when it comes to drug recognition, drug identification. So they have classes that they teach through NASRO that also address the teaching aspect of being an SRO.
Okay. Is there more that we can do from the legislature to help increase that collaboration? One of the things that we hear in the ledge, particularly from districts that, and I see Representative Nelson, I will get to you next online, sir. One of the things that that we hear as concerns, because as we know, not every school district has these sorts of services, are what does it look like for our community? What are the specific trainings that we get for officers that are moving into the SRO? Obviously, the school districts and police departments and such do the screenings. They try to find the right personality fit, et cetera, et cetera. Are there more things that we could be doing in the legislature to help organizations like school resource officers, et cetera, to increase that collaboration, increase the training, and try to just make the everything function just a little bit better? And you can think about it and get back to us. That's perfectly fine. We are trying to find solutions to way to make everything a little bit better. The one thing that folks will learn about this committee is that we don't sit still very well, and we're always trying to push the envelope. Even if we're great, we want to be 1% better the next year. So if there are things that the organization needs, I'd welcome a conversation with them very candidly to see if there are ways that we can continue to build trust and confidence in the system, and also just make improvements wherever we realistically can.
I would say a very good place to start for that would be, at least at the state level, to reach out to members of the PASRO leadership, and they could probably direct you into, hey, we could really use this, or we could really use your support in that. That I think would be a good starting point.
We can certainly do that. I'm going to stop my questions there. I had a couple of other things I wanted to touch upon, but I can, in the interest of time, I'll yield, and I'd like to turn it over to Chair Napoleon Nelson, who's joining us via Teams. Chair Nelson?
Sure, a pleasure. Thank you all for this conversation so far. I think one of the areas that we haven't yet talked about is kind of the understanding and ability to keep our school environments safe from what's happening and what's brewing outside of our school environments, right? So, I mean, and you did talk a little bit about Handle with Care, which, again, is an initiative that I absolutely love. And want to try and expand throughout the rest of the Commonwealth. But, unfortunately now we're seeing an awful lot of everything from, many incidents of bullying, many in-school fights and things of that nature are oftentimes born outside of the school district first, or really fanned outside of the school property, as well as plenty of, unfortunately, incidents of shootings and violence in communities, car thefts and other kind of elements of crime that we see in communities where many of our students perhaps exist. So let's help me understand a little bit about the ability for an SRO as opposed to an in-school kind of security personnel to be able to connect dots with what's happening in the school and what's happening in the community, and how do we ensure that we're not only trying to protect, again, our learning environment, but kind of protecting young people from making really bad and disastrous mistakes in or outside of the building. How do you guys as officers understand how your presence in the building, the relationships you build, and to some degree the information that you're able to glean from a police department and other outside law enforcement agencies. How does that help you do your job even better in a community safety perspective?
Yes, absolutely. Going back to your bullying point, 20, 30, maybe 15 years ago, when a kid got home from school, he was safe from that bullying. Now that access to a keyboard extends all the way to the home. So that kid is feeling that constant pressure of that bullying, even in the presence of his own home. Going to the security officer versus a police officer, I have access to our database where our records are kept. Where as a school security officer would not have access to that. So on Monday mornings, the first thing I do is I pull up every report that involved a juvenile from over the weekend. I'm combing through all of those reports, looking for my names of my students, the addresses, seeing what they were involved in, see what I can address. I can tell you on the connection base, Monday morning, there's sometimes a line of kids coming in to tell me what happened at their house over the weekend. Did you hear what happened there? Over and over again, it's a constant information relay between myself, the school, and my police department. So something that happens on patrol, I'm getting a phone call, whether it's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, looking for information on a student. How can I get in contact with them? When it comes to handle with care, I can have that first step into the building of letting those teachers know you need to handle this student with care because of what happened over the weekend, what that home life looks like. I hope I answered every part of your question there. If there's anything I need to elaborate on, let me know.
And again, I think, but it goes beyond just kind of I'll call it the bullying and handle with care. How do you identify the lines that exist when you think about, larger threats of violence, gun crimes, drugs, theft, and I don't want to call it an organized element of criminal activity, but how do you understand your role and access with young people and the larger need for departments? And maybe this is something that we see in urban spaces, suburban spaces. I got to imagine it exists as well in rural spaces that is more pressing now than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I
Do
haven't.
you find there to be a conflict that you have to wrestle with? Being an informant, trusted advisor, a real agent for community safety. What does that look like for you?
One step that I've taken since in coming into my role was becoming part of our SAP program at the school. That's the Student Assistance Program, and weekly we're identifying students that teachers or faculty are recognizing or having issues, whether it be mental health, drug use. So I am already one step ahead by getting that information and looking into that before things happen. You talk social media, we have the Safe to Say program. I'm on that team. I'm on our threat assessment team. So anytime any of these things are coming in, my hands are into that as soon as it comes across the school district's desk. So whether that's going out to a house to do a threat assessment, making sure that the access to weapons is limited or taken away from that child, it's doing everything you can to be involved in all these facets when it comes to safety and security and mental health. Having that connection to then the police department that can go out and do those safety checks, whereas your districts aren't going to go out and knock on the door and say, hey, can I see where you keep your weapons? So I think just making sure that gap is narrowed between law enforcement and education is the major thing when you talk about an SRO's importance in that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. We're going to go ahead and move on, if we could, to the third panel in the interest of time. Thank you, Chair Nelson. I appreciate your inquiry. Thank you, gentlemen, very, very much. Our third and final panel are some state agency perspectives. We have Lieutenant Adam Dickinson, who's the Operations Commander of Domestic Security Section, Bureau of Criminal Investigation for the State Police, and Mr. Mike Pennington, who's the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, who administers those grants that we were recently discussing. I want to thank you, gentlemen, both for being here and ask you again. And we have some other folks. Noted. Thank you. They're with you. But if you'd like to introduce yourself, please, by all means. Just a reminder for everyone, we have your written testimony. So if we can just pursue a dialogue with a summation followed by questions, that would be helpful for everyone. If you guys want to introduce yourself, you're welcome to.
Good morning. My name is Sam Cook. I'm the Policy Director with the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency.
And I'm Kirsten Kenyon. I am the Director of Office of Research, Evaluation, Strategic Policy Development, and my office oversees the School Safety Unit.
Thank you both very much. And with that, we'll start with Lieutenant Dickinson.
Good morning. As you said, I'm Lieutenant Adam Dickinson. I'm the Operations Commander for the Domestic Security Section within the Bureau of Criminal Investigation and the Pennsylvania State Police. Good morning, Chairman Schweier, members of the committee, Chairman Topper. Thank you for the opportunity to present remarks on behalf of the Pennsylvania State Police and the Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Team, also known as RVAT. I'll provide a brief synopsis to summarize for those of you who are not familiar with our program what it entails. So PSP RVAT is a group of sworn troopers who are trained to conduct professional risk and vulnerability assessments. RVAT initially became operational in April of 2004, and since its inception has expanded to include 18 full-time troopers and is divided into 3 regions, East, Central, and West. At a minimum, each RVAT member is required to attend the 2-week physical security training program that is provided by the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers. And each member is also required to successfully obtain their Physical Security Professional Board certification from the American Society for Industrial Security, or ASIS. Over the last 4 years, RVAT has averaged approximately 400 assessments every year. The mission of RVAT is to assist with the safety and security of schools, universities, government buildings, private facilities, critical infrastructure and key resources, houses of worship, and pre-planned events. The mission is accomplished through professional risk and vulnerability assessments, which consist of a comprehensive examination and evaluation of physical facilities and operational procedures. This assessment aims to identify critical assets and vulnerabilities to a wide potential of threats and to improve the safety and security of the facility. The suggestions are not meant to be all-encompassing, but the goal of the improvements is to provide options and to provide mitigation strategies for undesirable events and to provide means to deter or prevent an intrusion, delay an intruder, and to mitigate the damage of loss in life and provide methods to expedite notification to authorities. RVAT also throughout the year provides presentations regarding the function of the unit at various locations throughout the year. Thank you for this opportunity to provide you with the information on the function of PSP's RVAT and as it relates to school safety and security, and we look forward to participating in future discussions.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Mr. Pennington?
Yes, good morning, Chairman Schweier, Chairman Tapper, and distinguished members of the House Education Committee. My name is Mike Pennington, and I serve as Executive Director of the Commission on Crime and Delinquency, as you know, as PCCD. We really appreciate the invitation to be here today to discuss our ongoing efforts to create safe and secure learning environments in Pennsylvania schools. I'd like to recognize Representative Young and Representative Shalaba, who sit on our School Safety and Security Committee at PCCD. So in summarizing my submitted comments, I would like to begin by voicing that we share many of the same comments and concerns as some of the other testifiers today. We know from our colleagues at the Department of Education, Office of Attorney General, and State Police that there has been a massive uptick in the number of reported threats and social media threats across Pennsylvania since the start of this school year. These threats are an understandable source of worry and stress for students, for parents, educators, and law enforcement alike. PCCD is committed to doing what we can with the resources at our disposal to support state and local partners as they continue to respond to these issues. I'd like to applaud the General Assembly for recognizing the importance of tackling these emergency safety concerns and for its continued interest in updating the school code annually to address school safety needs as they arise. I want to assure you that our School Safety and Security Committee and its newly formed Executive Committee are all carefully monitoring trends and working in collaboration across our agencies to make sure that our youth can feel safe and only worry about what's important within the walls of their classroom, and that's learning. As the Commonwealth's Justice Planning and Policymaking Agency, as you know, we oversee a variety of programs focusing on enhancing community and public safety. Since put into place by Act 44 of 2018, our School Safety and Security Committee has played a crucial role in addressing a variety of school safety challenges through multiple approaches. As was noted, over the past 6 years, PCCD has issued over $600 million in grants aimed at improving physical health and behavioral health services in public and non-public schools, and we certainly appreciate the support from the legislature, the administration, to get these much-needed, as we've heard from the prior panels, much-needed resources out to schools and communities. We've also developed criteria and standards for assessing school security, along with behavioral health supports to identify and address gaps. One of our major initiatives was the establishment of an assessor registry, which helps schools find qualified experts to do these kind of assessments. We've also created a model plan for trauma-informed education and developed annual training programs for school employees to address issues like situational awareness and bullying prevention mandated by Act 55 of 2022. Effective threat assessments, which include threats to self and others, are another critical component of our strategy. Since the 2021-2022 school year, all public school entities in Pennsylvania are required to have a threat assessment team in place. As tasked by state law, PCCD has developed resources and guidelines to support these teams, ensuring they have the necessary training to identify and intervene with students who may harm themselves or others using an evidence-based threat assessment and management process. Research shows that early intervention can significantly reduce the likelihood of violence in our schools. In light of this, the Office of Attorney General's Safe to Say program has become an invaluable tool, providing students and staff with a means to report threats anonymously. Most recently, as you know, the legislature also enacted a law which requires each school district to employ at least one full-time security personnel during school hours with the goal of enhancing protections for students and staff. Despite the significant progress we have made in recent years, challenges certainly remain. Findings from our 2023 Pennsylvania Youth Survey indicated that student mental health is the top challenge facing youth, parents, and educators today. Additionally, we know that despite the significant investments we have made in school health programs, staffing shortages and other barriers mean there are still many places where support is not readily available. We are committed to addressing these gaps by continuing evaluating our policies, programs, and initiatives in collaboration with other state agencies and stakeholders working in this space. In conclusion, PCCD is dedicated to improving the school safety through evidence-based practices and collaboration with stakeholders at all levels. We will continue to advocate for sustainable funding and support to ensure every school has the resources it needs to protect its students and staff so that they can budget confidently. I look forward to our continued work together in fostering safe schools across Pennsylvania. As you know, I'm joined by my colleagues here, Kirsten Kenyon and Sam Cook, and who oversee our school safety initiatives, and together we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start with Rep. Cerisi.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony. So, Lieutenant, you brought up you have 18 people in your department and listed probably 1,000 venues that you have to cover. What would your department really look like if money wasn't an issue for funding?
As in, how many people would we need for our department or for the unit itself?
To make sure that we've covered all the bases we're supposed to cover.
We have a policy and legislative affairs department that would probably be more suited to speak to that. My area of expertise would be for the RVAT unit itself. But overall, any support that we could continue to receive as far as the budget for our department is concerned, and any discussions relative to our complement cap, because basically any unfunded mandate that we receive, or even the complement that I receive for RVAT, ultimately pulls from our base, which is the patrol trooper. So the more support we can get for that, the better all the units within the department would be.
So I guess as an in my 6 years as a legislator, and I'm a little bit more outspoken, as my colleagues will know. I'll say it like it is. If I'm going to throw $1,000 at an issue that really needs $1 million, I might as well keep the $1,000 and do nothing. And it's the same question for you, for the department also is one resource officer in a district that has 13,000 kids, you might as well have nothing. I don't mean that the way it sounds, but what are we doing? We're not fixing anything. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a cut that's the size of your arm. My issue is this. When you present to the legislative body, like we are, we're all equal in this room. Nobody's above anybody, and I often say, call me Joe, not representative, for a reason. We need to hear the real story. I don't want sugarcoating. I don't want rose-colored glasses. I want you to say to us, what you gave us is nothing. And not that we're not appreciative, but it's not going to do anything to solve the problem. The problem needs to be solved. This is the way the problem needs to be solved if we're going to do it right. And I'm going to go on record and say, this is the way this problem needs to be solved if we're going to do it right. And I'm not here to be angry or upset, but I'm here to say we need realism, because what I'm seeing isn't real. When that grant came out for one resource officer per district, whoopee-doo. I mean, a district that maybe has 500 kids, one building, that works. But a district like Philadelphia, to tell them one resource officer is going to do you good? Who are you kidding? You know, we need the truth said, and even if there's pushback, no one's getting fired for telling the truth. My other question was this. Do you all talk to each other? Because as we know in the past, departments never spoke to each other, so threats and resources, how often does everyone speak to each other? Because we have 400 departments and no one talks to each other. Again, what's the use of that?
Yeah, absolutely, we do talk to each other. I mean, as part of our school safety and security committee, all the key state agencies are on there. We meet regularly, we talk about these issues. You know, Department of Education, Pennsylvania State Police, and other agencies, and plus also school educators and school security experts are part of our school safety and security committee.
Do you hear 500 districts around the Commonwealth often that you all talk about what's going on in their districts and then bring it back to the table of what we're also seeing as threats?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk through all the grants. We fund all the school districts and schools, and we're in continuous conversations with them, you know, through the grant process. We also offer a significant amount of training to the schools. We conduct surveys as well to continuously learn each year, you know, what's working, what's not, what are gaps that we can, you know, how can we best utilize the resources that we have? We understand that there are many challenges that schools are facing. We heard from that earlier, and we try to get those resources out so they can use them the best way they can.
Well, I want to make it clear that I'm not downplaying anything you all do. What I'm saying is that we need to hear real numbers, because sugarcoating numbers and holding back because everyone's afraid to hold on to their job and all, it does us no good. Here's the real number. Here's the reality of the situation. And that's all I would ask, is that when we see presentations from everyone, we're seeing realistic, because again, where I supported the one resource officer, but thought, North Penn District, 13,000 kids, one resource officer, great. You know, so thank you all very much for what you do, and just continue to hear what we need to do for you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Young?
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. I do appreciate, again, this panel as I have the previous panels. I will say, though, just because I'm a newly appointed committee person, I do have a different lens because I'm a legislator, I get it. However, I'm always talking about my role as a mom first. That's priority to me. And so I will say I'm appreciative of the efforts, because to your point, that we are always trying to figure out different ways to not only improve the school communities, but the surrounding exterior communities to better help our schools. And that sometimes includes the parents and obviously the staff at the schools. What I would like to remind my colleague is that this is a funding source, but it's not the only funding source. And the schools are usually funded in a lot of different ways. And so there will be an opportunity for community-based organizations. Like I'm a huge component of that as well, because the community hub requires everybody on deck, and then there are other programs and organizations that are to add to the conversation of the school communities to help with what they call climate control. And so to funding, real numbers definitely needs to be shared. The grit of the work that is required definitely needs to be shared. But I also think when you're testifying, it's okay to include those partners who are also supporting of the conversation, because it does seem like at times if people are not aware of the collaborative work that's happening, they only see one entity, and it does seem a little dismal. So it's, in my opinion, I think it's okay to add the stakeholders that are also a part of the conversation, because they too need to be highlighted. So when everybody's asking for money, the picture can be broader and how it's effective for all. So thank you again for your work.
Thank you, ma'am. Chair Topper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, thanks to our panel for the continued work you do. Thank you, Lieutenant, for the work that you do on behalf of protecting our citizens. And I've said for many years, I think our state police, truly the gem of in all police forces in the United States of America. I truly believe that, and thank you for the work that you do. A few years ago, when my youngest son was in middle school, it was one of the more scary things I've ever seen. I was walking, my office is between, or the schools, both the middle school and the high school, are between my office and my house, and I was walking to work. It was mid-morning, and as I was crossing the bridge and I looked at the middle school in front of me, is when multiple state police vehicles, local borough police, and sheriff's deputy came screaming into the right in front of the school. And before the one vehicle had stopped, there was already a trooper armed out, kicking down the door, going into the school. It was a hoax, but our law enforcement responded. It was remarkable. As a dad, I was scared initially of what was going on. But as I reflected on that, in a rural school district, to have that kind of response time, I thought was somewhat incredible. So while you guys look at the physical hardening of buildings and sight lines, as I read in the testimony, those kind of things to make it safer, do you also look at the coordination between state police, local law enforcement, sheriff's department, the response times, how that can be done per district, who would respond when, the coordination of a response? Does that also fall under your purview? And I know we have to be careful about talking about specifics about how it's done, but in terms of, is that something that is looked at statewide from a PSP perspective?
Sure. So the way we look at response times, it's hard to gauge that simply based on the location of the school and the location of the barracks that covers them. So as the members of the committee may or may not know, we're divided into zones. Our barracks, the area that our barracks covers, is divided into zones. So for instance, I used to work down in Troop J. I was out of the Embryville station. Our zone that encompass some of our largest schools would include several townships. We don't operate like a fire department. So when we get a call to one of those schools, we're not leaving from the station and then traveling to the location of that school. That trooper should already be in his zone, which is in a relatively close area of the school district that they're covering. That being said, each area, depending on what local resources they have, sheriffs, local police departments, and whatnot, they all they coordinate themselves as far as what is taking place. So one of the schools that I used to frequent as a patrol trooper was O&J Roberts School District in Chester County. So I would go in there, but I've actually had calls while I was there. I've also had calls when I'm not there, and any type of situation that's a critical incident, our dispatch is going to notify all of the surrounding sheriffs, local police departments, and us. And whoever gets there first is going to be the one that's going to be taking action, forming that team. And in the case of that school, often some of my closest backup was actually the game commission. So we get word out to anybody that's in that area for an incident like that, as you presented it in your question, was you saw sheriffs, you saw the state police, you saw a number of different agencies showing up. And that's a testament to that coordination between them when something serious happens.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Pennington, just to a point that I made earlier in an earlier panel, the flexibility of dollars, how do you see that? Do you see that as as something you would like to see moving forward? In other words, increase in dollars as well as flexibility? Or do we need to start getting back to trying to direct more specifically what school districts can use? What do you think?
I mean, usually with any grant program, I think flexibility is always appreciated. But we also respect the input from, schools and others. But, I think the flexibility is important because, we're certainly cognizant of, the staffing shortages, the challenges that are going on locally that we heard today. So that schools can use, if you don't want to hire full-time people, you can contract with people. So it might be a little cheaper to do that, but that varies. That varies across school districts, varies across jurisdictions, and so I mean we certainly think the flexibility is important, but also we certainly, as we normally do, get the input from our partners and stakeholders so that we can look at what we're doing each year, and if there's changes we need to make in that flexibility or changes that we need to make. In that, but also we certainly have to adhere to the statutory requirements that is through the legislation that we have to follow.
Thank you so much. And just a final point to the gentleman from Montgomery's point about school resource officers in this current school code. It provided that there shall be at least one. That's the mandate. Understanding that for some schools they might want more. However, I don't feel comfortable prescribing a number higher than one if the one would be good enough for some of these smaller schools. So while a school resource officer one might not be particularly enough at a school district, they certainly can provide more. I think from a state mandating level, though, it becomes a little trickier to try and prescribe the exact number that would be needed for each school. So I am comfortable with the number and how it was done in the school code. And if there are better ways that we can do that in terms of funding, we will look at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you all for your testimony and all the incredible work that you do. And I genuinely mean that. I hope, if absolutely nothing else, and although I think this hearing has been extremely helpful, I think there's, at the very least, a significantly better understanding and appreciation for the work that everyone does in this sphere in every quarter of the Commonwealth. Lieutenant, question for you that I had asked previously. We'd heard and learned a little bit about the PA School Resource Officers Association, some of the collaboration. I know the School Boards Association does some of this work. Where does PSP fit in on bringing folks together, having those best practices conversations, those sorts of things? Is there a way or an opportunity for us to do better? Do you think it's working pretty well right now? Is there something more collaborative that we should be doing? Just kind of looking for ideas here.
Bringing who together?
It's the school resource officers, districts that participate, entities that provide support services, whether they're local police departments, IUs, any of those things. Is there a more robust way to do that in addition to the conference that we heard about before? And Mr. Pennington, if you have thoughts on it, please by all means jump in as well.
Yeah, if he has thoughts, I would defer, but I would say that would be more a question directed towards our community service officers who deal with that all the time.
That's fine. That's absolutely fair. And if we're not sure, that's fine. It's a conversation to move forward. And ultimately, if it's something that we don't need, I'll drop it. But I at least want to be able to ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so PCCD has supported threat assessment training, and I think we do surveys each and every year of school stakeholders who are involved in that process. And I'll just say, one of the areas that we've heard is, in terms of a gap of confidence, is around sort of the coordination, not just in the school building, but really with outside community-based partners, and specifically law enforcement. And I think there's probably a number of drivers of that. There's a lot of churn and turnover in all of those settings. And so to the earlier point about relationships, I think that's continuing to be a challenge for folks as they sit in new seats as principals or superintendents, and their chiefs of police locally might have some new folks in their seats as well. So I think strengthening those types of protocols and recommendations for how to do the basics of relationship building, training together, the role that local law enforcement and other justice-related and community-based partners and providers can and should play on your school's threat assessment team and related protocols, I think is an area that we have heard both from law enforcement entities that we work with as well as from educators. So that's a gap that PCCD and our partners are certainly paying attention to. We're actually in the process of revising our model threat assessment procedures And that's an area that we'd really like to dig in a little bit further and enhance those kinds of supports. It's also an area where our training providers are looking to update their scenario-based trainings so that folks can practice and have those conversations well in advance of an incident. The coordination that was referenced earlier, I think, is much easier to navigate when you've had those conversations ahead of a crisis.
As you develop any policies or ideas that either need legislative support or approval, please let us know. But even if you're doing things that are internal work that PCCD is able to do just throughout your, via your own authorities, if you keep us posted, we can certainly let our committee members know and members of the General Assembly know. That way, because we know that there's a lot of work, we just don't know what it all is. And I know that's difficult, not just for your agency, but everywhere across the Commonwealth. We're happy to count PCCD as a real partner in education, not just school safety, but just all of the things that you do. And we want to make sure that we're able to highlight and also inform our members of that. So if you have ideas that you need our help, please let us know. If you're able to do some stuff, let us know, and we can share that good word.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. I want to talk about the school safety grants for just a little minute, just a minute if we could, because I want to be careful on how I say this. We did $100 million this year. We did $100 million basically last year we prorated some balance, yada, yada, yada. But we don't distribute that money on a per pupil basis. We start with a base funding where every school district gets a certain amount. And then therefore, there are smaller school districts get a higher dollar amount per student versus larger districts. Northeastern, I'm not picking on you, Superintendent, I promise. Northeastern gets $41 per pupil, and Philadelphia gets $19 per pupil of that money. And I want to say, I'm actually okay with that. Terrible thing for a guy who represents Allentown to say. I'm sorry, so my school board members, please don't kill me later. I also represent East Penn and Salisbury school districts. Because we have other ways of making that up. Most notably, I have a local police department, and not all of these folks do. However, that does create some baked-in inequity amongst the school districts. Are there things that we can do to at least reduce some of the inequities between those school districts, short of increasing the funding, which, oh, by the way, as Rep. Cerisi said, we just simply need to do?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question.
It is, but it's not meant to be.
I know.
It's an acknowledgement of what actually is, and an acknowledgement that there's a real policy reason why a school district like Bedford might need a little bit more on this particular topic than a school district like Bethlehem, although they might disagree with me. I acknowledge that there's potentially policy reasons because we all want kids in every school district to be safe. But is there an argument to be made that we need to tweak it, add additional funding to reduce that inequity? And if you don't know, I'm also, if everybody hasn't noticed, it's October of the last year of session, which means we're also starting conversations for next year as well.
Yeah.
So everybody should realize that, saying the quiet part out loud, there are people in I'll say in my caucus that are concerned that the larger districts maybe aren't getting as much per pupil, and that inequity is a little bit bigger. I think there's an argument to be made for it, but also, is there an argument that we can do it just a little bit better?
Well, from our perspective, we administer what you give us. So in terms of the school code, the way the formula is broken down, charter schools, intermediate units, and area and career technical centers all get a flat $70,000 in terms of their grants. School districts, to your point, get a flat $100,000 as a starting point, and then they get a bump on top based on, I believe, their average daily membership, or adjusted average daily membership. So to your point, that does work out to, like, the smaller school districts probably end up getting between around $125,000, maybe on average $150,000 as their grant. The largest school district, Philadelphia, I believe they get tapped out about $3 million is the max amount that they get under the grant program. In terms of making it more equitable, I honestly don't even know where to begin, and I would default to your preeminent wisdom in that regard as to how to fix that potential problem.
Flattery will get you in a lot of places in Harrisburg. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
It's less of it's something that we need to at least say out loud. I'm not necessarily saying that it's wrong. Again, $125,000 for a rural or a small school district actually might be the difference between them being able to have one SRO and none. And if they have 3 academic buildings, that's what you have in Bedford, right? 3? Or do you have 4? Do you have 2 middle schools or 2 elementaries? 3? And at least 2 of them are on the same campus, right? That's a significant, that puts them in a better position. But I will say those that represent larger school districts, both geographically and from a student basis, get concerned about that a little bit. And let me ask about the geography. So I think about something like the Hazleton School District that is not only a relatively speaking pretty large school district in terms of enrollment, but it is a geographically very large district. We have, in addition, Philly and I believe Forest counties are single county school districts in Pennsylvania. Is there any consideration for the geography of it to address the response time question that we had? Or aren't we sophisticated? And this is not a PCCD shot by any stretch of imagination. Have we just not factored that into, put that into consideration at all? Okay. All right. I don't know if there's an easy way to do that or even an effective way, but it's something that we might want to consider, at least as we're having policy discussions with our friends and partners with the state police. So just things that we need to consider. Again, I think we do things, relatively speaking, very well in Pennsylvania when it comes to this topic. We are not immune to national trends, but as we try to do just a little bit better every year, not only in terms of resources, but the thoughtfulness. It's why I keep asking about coordination and conversations and trainings and the selections, because there's always a way to do it just a little bit better, and I want to continue looking at the direction. So, Chair Topper, I'm going to turn it over to you for any closing thoughts you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just would, again, appreciate the ongoing conversation with all of you who have testified and the groups that you represent. I've met with some of you individually. I'm sure all the members of the committee have as well. Those conversations do wonders for us as we move forward and look how to do things better. I know of the school districts that I represent, and all 10 of those superintendents who have my cell number, those conversations are appreciative with the police, with our school resource officers, with the PCCD. When you see something that you think could be done better, we don't have to wait for an informational hearing. Please let us know. I say all the time, we vote on things from healthcare to industry, the labor issues, the environmental issues, education. You can't be an expert in everything. So we lean on input from the experts. Understand then that we have to put that in and factor it in with the larger picture and how we can make it all work for all of those sectors, and of course, in our case, education. So please keep these conversations ongoing. Always feel that you can call myself, staff. I'm sure the chairman feels the same way, so that we can continue these conversations into the next legislative session and continue our #1 priority, which is to ensure that every student has access to high-quality education in the Commonwealth, and one that they can certainly feel safe and secure in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before my final comments, I will say for the record, there are 2 additional written testimonies that are in members' packets. It's available on the QR code on our website from Dr. Adam Oldham, who is a high school guidance counselor and is representing the School Counselors Association of Pennsylvania. We also have written testimony from the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. We appreciate both of them for submitting their thoughts and ideas to this committee and to the General Assembly. I'd also like to take a second to thank my staff and Chair Topper's staff for helping us put together a remarkably important, delicate hearing on something that is just really every parent and every community's worst nightmare, and doing so in a manner that I think will lead to better conversations and potentially significant policy changes, even if they seem small, that could have very wide-reaching ramifications. it's a tough conversation because not only is it highly emotional, but it's really hard to show when things are going well. Because when things are going well, there aren't school shootings, there aren't suicides, there aren't increasing numbers of bullying incidences and all those other things that we see. And when things go bad, they just go horrific. And I'm again thinking back to a couple weeks ago, and the pictures of my daughter hiding behind her desk. I want to make sure that we continue this dialogue, continue the hard conversations that we have to have in our communities amongst our professionals, and certainly within the halls of this building, to make sure we're giving folks all of the support that we possibly can. There's not a teacher, there's not a police officer, there's not a parent that isn't unbelievably concerned about it, and it's our responsibility, working with our partners, to make sure that our schools are areas of learning, of growth, of development for our students in a safe environment. I genuinely appreciate all the professionals that testified today, and you have and I feel confident speaking on behalf of both majority and the minority parties, that you have our full support in working with you to try to make sure that next year is better than this year, and the year after that's better than the previous. So I genuinely appreciate it. And for the members' notice, it is, you're welcome, my intention not to have any more hearings the rest of this legislative cycle. If anything comes up, we will certainly communicate with our members, both majority and minority, and the appropriate staffs. And with that, this hearing is closed. Thank you very much.